This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Catherine Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here will focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. Whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Catherine Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so honored you're here. Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here. This summer has had us listening to some really fantastic guests. I hope that y'all have been enjoying them as we move through summer and, I hate to say it, march toward a new school year, but we're not there yet. Don't worry. But I really had a desire to interview a mom today. I wanted to hear a NICU story filled with hope and encouragement. But this one has a little bit of a twist in that, in addition to giving you a lot of hope and encouragement, there is something that this mom did that is benefiting hundreds of thousands of babies, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so she took a really difficult experience that they had, the hardest experience really, and looked around and said, how can our experience enrich and help the lives of other people while we also honor the life of our son? And today's trigger warning is that we do briefly visit about death and dying. So I wanted you to know that. If you feel like you need to fast forward through that part of the interview, or if you just need a break, that's okay. But I wanted you to know that that is a small part of what we visit about. But my guest today is an amazing mom, an amazing woman, and an amazing entrepreneur. She saw something in the NICU and said, there's got to be a better way. And not only did she say there's got to be a better way, but she followed through and she made something that perhaps you might be using right now and you had no idea what the rest of the story is. And so today you're going to get the rest of the story. My guest today is Misti Staley. Misti's son, Freeman, was born in 2015 after a healthy pregnancy, but after birth, Misti learned of his many medical complexities. Freeman spent 3.5 months in the NICU. He was home for 5 weeks and then spent 5 long months in the PICU before sadly losing his battle with pulmonary hypertension at 10 months old. After Freeman's passing, Misti built Freeman Playground in Helena, Arkansas. It's an ADA playground with ramps and a poured-in-place rubber surface. And through all that Misti learned through Freeman's tube feeding journey, she also created the Freearm. It's a tube feeding device that holds gravity syringe feeds, pump feeds, and infusions at the hospital, at home, and on the go. So Freeman's legacy of love continues through both the Freeman Playground and the Freearm. And with that, let's chat. Well, I'm super grateful and thankful to have Misti Staley with me today. Misti, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
No, I think we have a lot to talk about. You have a really beautiful story that led to something that helps NICU families, but I know that came with some heartache associated with that. So I think I'd like to start just with a little bit about your background and your story. Why don't you tell us about the birth of your NICU baby, Freeman?
Sure. So I had a healthy pregnancy, full term. We didn't know that Freeman was going to have any medical complexities. And then he was born in 2015. And then shortly after he was born, he was life flighted to the NICU that's 2 hours from our house. And so I had just gone through a 30-hour labor and didn't think that anything was like dire. And so we drove the 2 hours to get to the hospital. And then it was there that we really started learning about all of Freeman's differences. So he had a coloboma in one of his eyes. So the black part dripped down into sort of a keyhole shape. He had 2 holes in his heart, a small cleft palate in the very back of the roof of his mouth. And then an extra rib, a horseshoe-shaped kidney. So it was all of these midline differences that didn't show up on any sonograms. So we had no idea to expect them. And then about 5 days after Freeman was in the NICU, he went on ECMO. And if you're not familiar with ECMO, it's this giant machine for this tiny little baby. But it has two cannulas, so two tubes that connected into Freeman's neck. And so one of the tubes took the blood out of his body, the big machine oxygenated it, and then the blood went back into his body. So it really gave his heart and his lungs a break, which is pretty serious. And I didn't really know how serious it was at the time. And I'm thankful for that. But Freeman did come off ECMO. And then I was able to hold him again for the first time after he was born. I think it was 11 days later, but it was on Mother's Day. So that was pretty special.
I'm listening to your story and I'm seeing a lot of joy remembering some of those really early days. I think sometimes when we're in the NICU, we tend to focus on, or I think people tend to think that you're focusing on the hard things, but NICU moms also know that you have to hold on to the joy when it comes your way. And there's blissful ignorance. I think that if we knew all of this going into the NICU, we probably wouldn't have been able to experience those moments of joy because it would have been clouded by all the things that we thought could go wrong or would go wrong, and instead we just stay present in the moment. How long was Freeman in hospital in total, but also in the NICU, Misty?
So we ended up being in the NICU for 3.5 months. And Freeman being full term, it was hard to see all of the preemie families or a lot of the preemie families discharging before us. So we were like, when is it going to be our turn to discharge? But with Freeman's cleft palate and then with being on ECMO, the NICU nurses had told me ECMO babies are notoriously bad eaters, and we don't really know why. But through both of those, Freeman had a feeding tube his whole life. So he went from an OG tube in his mouth to an NG tube in his nose once he got a little bigger. And then before we discharged, he had a G tube surgically placed in his belly. And so we were able to work up on still practice bottle feeds and breastfeeding, but also be able to give him the rest of the nutrition that he needed through his G tube. So we were in the NICU 3.5 months, discharged home. We were home for 5 weeks, but then we had to go back to the PICU, and we were in the PICU for 5 months. So a long time. The hospital really was our second home.
It's the home that none of us want. We're grateful to have it, but it's a hard place to be. So Misty, when he was discharged from the NICU and came home those 5 weeks, did he come home with any? I know you said he had a G tube. Were there any other things that he came home with that you guys were trying to navigate and figure out that were brand new to your family?
Yes. So Freeman had pulmonary hypertension. So he did have to have some at home oxygen support. So he came home with this giant blue oxygen machine that was very noisy. And I would try to sit it outside of our bedroom door. Freeman's crib was in our room. And so I would try to set that out of the door and close the door so that, I mean, it's like a generator, basically. It's just so loud. And so then he would wear his nasal cannula, and with home oxygen also comes a pulse ox. So he had the pulse ox as well. With his G tube, he was gravity syringe fed during the day. So he had an open syringe that I would hold Freeman and hold the syringe, but try to hold his passy in because with the cleft palate, he didn't have enough suction to keep it in. But as part of therapy, he needed to suck as his tummy filled. So he would relate the two so that once we had that repaired, he wouldn't have lost that suck, swallow, breathe rhythm. So it was just trying to balance everything and thinking, oh my gosh, I need another hand. And then at night, Freeman had pump feeds. You can see behind me if you're watching on YouTube, he had the infinity pump in the 500 ml bag. And so this tiny pump and tiny bag, and then we came home with this giant IV pole. So that IV pole was next to his crib at night with the pump in the bag. And then I was getting up for myself to pump to get the milk and then fill everything
So much
up.
pumping, so much pumping.
So much pumping and so much like washing things, just so
Yeah.
many different pieces to wash afterwards. But having to put all of that in the bag, and a lot of nights I would trip over that IV pole and ended up with a lot of blue toes. It was hard to have all of that medical equipment at home, but we knew that it was necessary.
So you were, for those that were watching on YouTube, you had the visual of you. I mean, I think we can all picture it, you holding the baby, holding the syringe, holding the pacifier. And I'm thinking, what mom couldn't use one extra hand? I mean, we could all use the opportunity to like bilocate, to like be in two places at one time. But sometimes I'm like, man, if just one more hand, which is always why it's nice to have one other person in the house. But sometimes it's always nice. You're like, if I just had one more attached to me that I could do things with. So I'm guessing so the reason that I had you on the podcast is because you have a beautiful story, which led to something that benefits families and will for a very long time. So maybe walk us through what led you to create this beautiful invention that you have and how it can help families.
Sure. So I guess it all sort of started when we were in the NICU. So Freeman was on like a push pump that would push the milk through the feeding tube at a certain rate. But then as he was working up on larger like feed volumes that sort of mimic him drinking out of a bottle over 20 minutes, we would try to have that go through the open syringe over 20 minutes. So adding a little bit at a time. But with that, you're having to hold that syringe for the full 20 minutes. And so your arm gets very tired, and nurses in the hospital, they're unable to stand and hold that syringe, because I know that nurses had at least two babies they were looking at. We were in open pods. But then if a nurse went to lunch and then she was also watching their babies, I mean, sometimes it was 3 or 4 babies. So to be able to free the nurse's hands, she would have to rig it. So she would have to either tie it above the top of the tall canopy crib with a ribbon so it would hang there, or tape it to the crib. Or if I was holding Freeman, sometimes they would try to tape it to my shirt, and a lot of times it would come untaped. We would both end up drenched, and I'd be like,
Oh my gosh.
no, liquid gold. And so it was just really hard to try and figure out, like, what can we do with the syringe to free our hands, but also was kind of a patient safety issue because it was hanging over Freeman so close to him. And if he started to spit up and aspirate, doctors were rushing over, but like batting at this syringe to get it out of the way. So then once we discharged home and I was sitting on the couch holding Freeman and try to balance everything, I didn't have a place to rig it. I didn't have the tall canopy crib at home to tie it over. I tried tying it over Freeman's just normal crib at home, but the ribbon was even closer to Freeman. So it made it an even bigger safety issue.
And I'm thinking you were doing this probably 6, 7, 8 times a day. It's not like this was a one-time thing. Like he has to eat throughout the day. So it must have been stressful.
It was every 3 hours. So, and I was pumping every 3 hours, but I had to balance those out to where it
Right.
didn't always balance out. Sometimes I was still connected to the pump and trying to hold Freeman, and there
Oh
were
my
just
gosh.
wires everywhere. But you do what you got to do. You know,
Sure.
you're a medical mom, and you just want to give your baby the most love you possibly can and try to figure it out. So it was me trying to balance things that I said, Will, to my husband, Will, please help me. Like, I need something to hold the syringe. So that's when he went to the garage and he took 2 pieces of like 1 inch by 1 inch pieces of wood, and he put those together in an upside down L shape. And so we took the L shaped Freearm that we had made and taped that to the back of Freeman's crib, took the posy, took the ribbon, hung the syringe from the top part of the L, and then I could free my hands, have Freeman in his crib, be able to swing it out of the way quickly if I needed to, but also soothe him, hold his passy in, like read him a book, be able just to do
Normal
mom
things.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was so special. So then once we went back to the PICU, we were talking with our nurses there about what we had created. And they were saying, oh my gosh, we need something like that in the hospital too. Because even after we were back in the PICU, um, Freeman wasn't on gravity syringe feeds long while he was in the PICU. He moved to a pump feed, and then they would take him off, and then he would go on TPN, and it was just this back and forth thing. But while he was there for the first week, we were still trying to gravity syringe feed him and figure out where can we put the syringe? And so it was really talking with those nurses that we knew something needs to be created to not only help families at home, but to help nurses in the hospital. But not a lot of time to think about that while we were in the
Sure.
PICU, because we were very focused on Freeman's care, and we were there every day cheering him on. And he was intubated for 2 months while we were in the PICU. And that was really difficult, just to like not be able to hold him and just have to hold his hand and read to him. And just to feel like I couldn't make him better. But he did get a trach the day after Thanksgiving in 2016. And from there, we thought, this is going to be the turning point. This is what's going to get us out of the PICU. But with all the PEEP pressure, Freeman ended up with some pneumothoraxes, so some holes in his lungs and then chest tubes. And we just never could really turn that corner. And then sadly, we lost Freeman the day after Valentine's Day of 2016. And he was almost 10 months old. But we were there every day cheering him on and just never saw that coming. Just were so hopeful and ready to be trach parents and learn the home vent and just teach us, and we'll do what we need to do. But we never had a chance to make it to that point.
I think it's important to pause for a moment and say thank you for sharing the hardest day of your life. Um, I know that there's a mom or a dad listening to this that may be in a similar situation. Maybe the medical situation may be slightly different, but the loss is the same. And I just wanted to give honor to that ability to share his story with all of us. This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app, join one of our support groups, or find one-to-one support, enjoy counseling, find loss and bereavement support, participate in a peer-to-peer mentor program, or check out our news, articles, and family stories at handtohold.org. All of that is at no cost to you. Hand to Hold's mission is to provide personalized support before, during, and after a NICU stay to help ensure that all NICU families thrive. I'm listening to you share about these nurses who were being your cheerleaders in the PICU, and I'm wondering, Misti, as you guys started to grapple with the loss of Freeman as you move into your life, as you get discharged from the PICU without him, what was your headspace then, and what were you thinking about? Sometimes when parents lose a child, they often think how can we honor their memory? How can we let people know that they had this, while it was brief, but this meaningful life? And we have to find a way to let people know that they were an important part of our family. Where were y'all in that moment?
It was hard on the way home from the hospital that night, because they gave us the opportunity to hold Freeman and be there as long as we needed. But it was on the way home that I looked at Will and said, what do I do tomorrow? I had been advocating so hard for Freeman. And we had basically moved to Little Rock. Our in-laws live in Little Rock. So we were really blessed to be able to stay with them throughout that whole hospital journey. But coming back to Helena, where we live 2 hours from the hospital, to just get back to work. And my background's in art. So before Freeman, I was teaching after school mural classes and art classes and doing commissioned pieces. And I just didn't feel creative in that capacity. And so Will said, what if we built a playground in Freeman's memory, and you could start working on that? And I was like, that would be amazing. And so we mentioned that. So that next weekend at Freeman's life celebration, where tons and tons of friends and family came who had never even met him, but had just seen our posts on Facebook and kept up with him and constantly messaged us and said, how's Freeman today? And so many of his nurses, even nurses who were off that day, like drove in, which it was only like 2 exits down from the hospital where Freeman is buried, but they pretty much drove to work that day just to come and support us, and
Wow.
I'll forever be grateful for that. But at that celebration ceremony, we mentioned building a playground in Helena, Arkansas, which the 2010 census, I believe, it was one of the 20 most impoverished places in the U.S. And so that is what brought us here, was my husband's nonprofit that he's running here in Helena. And so we really are in need of safe playgrounds for kids. And so to think of building one in Freeman's memory and the memory of other kids within Phillips County who have passed away, everyone at the celebration was just like, oh, that's amazing, and I'll donate to that. And it just really started. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start a foundation. So I started the Freeman Foundation so that people could donate to building the playground. And then I started talking with playground reps and really found out, holy cow, playgrounds are really expensive.
Yes, they are. They are.
And so my rep is just amazing. And she was like, adding ramps to the equipment is going to up like tens of thousands of dollars to the price. And I was like, but we have to have them. Like, I know so many families now that need ramps on the playground to be able to go play, just through everyone that I met at the hospital. And so for the next year, after losing Freeman, it was a healthy way for me to grieve by putting kind of all my focus into this playground. And so we built this really fun Delta themed, we're right on the Mississippi River. So really fun Delta themed playground with ramps on the equipment, poured in place rubber surface, high back merry-go-round, high back swing. It's just a place where every family can go and play. And at the time of opening in 2017, it was what would have been Freeman's second birthday. It was that weekend. And so at the time of opening, I think it was the only playground in Arkansas within 90 miles that had ramps on the equipment. So it really was life-changing and is life-changing for our community to have this safe playground. But you were asking about kind of like Freearm and how that came to be. And throughout building the playground, Will kept saying, like, I really think we should bring the Freearm to market and really think about that. And I was like, Will, I have no idea how to start a medical company. Like,
You're
I
like, a
don't know.
playground, but you just created a playground. He must have been like, but you just did this thing. Like, while they are not the same, it's the spirit, that leads. And he's probably looking at you saying, yes, you can. And you're thinking, I can't, but look what we just created. I love it.
There's just so much red tape. There's FDA.
Yeah,
There's all of these things that aren't with a playground. A playground, you just have to have like, squishy stuff under the swings and under the slides so that to
right.
a certain amount, like a certain thickness, so that kids don't get hurt. And that to me just seemed, I don't know, so much easier to figure out. But after the playground opened, it was that same thing where I looked at Will and I said, what do I do tomorrow? I mean, I could feel that nervousness kind of rising up of,
Right.
it was still my way of sort of advocating for Freeman and advocating for all of these medically complex families that I had met by building the playground. But I'm done. Like, the playground's open now. And Will's like, I really think we should think about the Freearm. So we went to the Arkansas Small Business Technology and Development Center in Little Rock and talked with them. And they offer like free business consulting. And it was just really, really helpful. And from there, they introduced us to a small business accelerator. It's called the Delta I Fund. And so we were able to go through that program where they really had us do a ton of customer discovery. And so it was part of our homework every week to call 5 different parents that were tube feeding their child at home and 5 different nurses who were tube feeding within the hospital, and just ask them, like, what are your pain points with tube feeding? We would hear from parents that Well, I feed my son on an exercise trampoline. So I'll lay him on the trampoline, and it has this like bar on the front that you hold on to when you jump. But I use that bar to tape the syringe to the bar, and then he can lay on the trampoline, and then I feed him that way. Or it's
And
just like,
you're like, there has to be a better way. I mean, there has to be a better way.
so if you're not able to see it, if you're listening to the podcast, so it holds a gravity syringe feed. So it has a clip at the top that can hold the syringe, and then the arm is bendable. So you can lower the syringe for the feed to go slower, raise the syringe for the feed to go faster. The clamp at the bottom clamps to a flat surface. So table next to your bed or the crib or table next to the couch, but it also clamps to a rounded bar. So a stroller or a wheelchair. And then you can also attach a lightweight feeding pump or infusion pump, and then a feed bag or infusion bag up to 1,200 mils. And that way you don't have that giant IV pole anymore that's taking up all of this floor space and you're tripping over it. You can clamp it to the table and really tuck it out of the way. And then the Freearm comes in 4 fun colors. So pink, blue, white, and green. And so it just makes it feel a lot less medical. You can match it to your room or match it to your wheelchair. And it's just more fun for not only kids, but adults too, to just not have so much of that sterile medical equipment in your home.
So after you decide to really pursue the free arm and you started to navigate, I'm sure, some decent amounts of red tape to get it to where it needs to be. Um, did you think that like it might be, I mean, I know your playground is more local. In other words, like you have to be in that area to utilize that. Free arm's a little bit different in the sense that it could have the ability to be really anywhere in the world. Did you think that it might get to that place, or were you thinking like, well, let's just see if we can make it something that we can either use in Little Rock or in Arkansas? Where were y'all at?
I really wanted it to reach every family that needed a helping hand. Through the customer discovery and talking with families, talking with nurses who were talking about paper clip chains and over the crib and rubber band chains. And it's just like I knew that it needed to get to everyone who needed one. And so we launched in late 2018 with the Free Arm, and just through our website sales, and then starting an Amazon store in 2020, and then through hospitals purchasing, like to date, I believe we're in 28 countries now. And it's just amazing. Like the instructions inside the Free Arm, we have them available in English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and now Czech. And so it's just so neat to think that all of these families know about Freeman and his little life, and how we had, a lot of hard times trying to tube feed him, and now they're able to tube feed easier, and not just children but adults too.
That must bring you an immense amount of joy.
It does. Yeah.
I love that. I think, Misty, there might be someone listening to this who's thinking, maybe it's, maybe their baby is G-tube fed, or maybe their situation is similar to yours, and they're trying to figure out, a device, or maybe they're listening to this and they have another piece of equipment, which I know NICU babies come home with a whole plethora of things. And maybe that mom or that dad is feeling incredibly overwhelmed with the enormity of their child's medical needs, but also managing all this equipment. What would be your encouragement to them as they find themselves maybe in a space that they've never been in before?
Yeah. I was really in the dark. Like when we discharged from the NICU, it was like, wait, but I'm going home with a different pump than Freeman was using in the hospital. Like the beeps sound different. And it's just, I felt overwhelmed that I was going home as a new mom, but also as a nurse, a full-time nurse as well. And so I would say you'll have a durable medical equipment company or a home medical equipment company, so a DME or an HME, that after you're discharged from the NICU, this will be the company that sends you your monthly tube feeding formula, your pump, your bags, or your gravity syringe, the gauze for around the G tube, your extra G tubes. if you have a trach, any trach ties, anything like that, any oxygen supplies. So really ask, who is that company and what is their contact information, so that you know, because if you reach out to that company, a lot of times those companies will have dietitians on staff, they might have nurses on staff. They'll be able to answer those questions that you have. And so don't be afraid that if you have questions about the pump, or you have questions about, why am I only getting 5 syringes a month when in the hospital they threw them away after every single feed? Like, what's the best way for me to wash this and keep this clean so that it lasts the whole month until I get my next supplies? Like, don't be afraid to ask those questions. They're so important. I would also say, build a community. I didn't have Instagram when I discharged from the NICU, but through the Freearm, we have an Instagram page. It's Freearm Tube Feeding Assistant, if you guys want to follow us. But through that page and through things like following hashtags, so hashtag G-tube baby, hashtag trach baby, hashtag tube feeding life, like all these different hashtags, and being able to connect with other families that use those same hashtags, and just seeing like, we were not alone. There are so many families going through the same journey that we did, and to be able to connect with them and reach out to them and connect with other families. There's also Facebook groups that you can join. G-tube Babies is one. So just really kind of seek out those communities that you can ask other parents, how are you navigating this? And I think that's so helpful. Another piece of advice is find fun stuff that's not so medical. On our website, which is freearmcare.com, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, we have a friends tab. And on that friends tab, we list out all sorts of companies, anything from Billy Footwear, which are shoes that have a zipper that zip from the top of the tongue all the way around the toe and back up. So you're able to lay the top of the shoe open and step your foot in, which is especially helpful if you have braces, like ankle braces. And so, but they're shoes for everybody, shoes for every kid. Like, it's so much easier to zip that zipper than to tie the laces. And so to have those products, to have clothing, adaptive clothing for G-tube, so you're not having to strip your child down completely naked in public. You can just open the door. So Tubesies is one of them. Just open the door, attach the G-tube, close the door back. There's all sorts of fun companies on there like that. So really reach out to them and just get some fun stuff, fun button covers that have cute characters on them, and just, it doesn't have to be so medical.
That is maybe some of the best advice I've ever heard a mom give another NICU mom. Thank you. What a great resource on your website. Only a mom would think of that, to put that on their website. No shade to your husband, but I do think that we tend to see the world a little bit differently. And what a great collaborative resource that you guys have created. Misty, thank you for sharing Freeman's story. Thank you for sharing the evolution of your playground and now this Freearm and how it can help families. I hope that as a mom or a dad is listening to this, that they find some encouragement. And also thank you for sharing a little bit about your story. I'm grateful to have it. Thank you. I hope that y'all really enjoyed my visit and my conversation with Misty. I think I continue to be struck by this spirit of generosity that not all of us in a hard situation look around at the world and say, how can we make things better? And maybe don't go to the extent that Misty did. And I think I'm really encouraged and inspired by the fact that she looked around, paused, absolutely took the moment to grieve the loss of her son. But I think it was what she said to her husband, Will, when she said, what do I do tomorrow? And I think many of us who have been in the NICU and it's been a hard day, that we look around and say, what do we do tomorrow? How are we going to do tomorrow? And I think the fact that Misty took a moment to grieve her son, and then she also looked around at the NICU community and her own community and said, how can we honor Freeman's life And what can that look like? And that she dove in feet first. I'm sure we talked about some of this in the interview, that there were absolutely obstacles, but she didn't let that stop her from finding a way to make things better. And I think her advice at the end was really poignant and really helpful, in that the age of social media is sometimes the bad rap that it gets. There are great communities that you can find through social media, whether it be hashtags or on websites or on social media feeds, and the things that you can do. But I think the thing that I loved most is that Friends tab that she has on her website, where if you're looking for companies who are creating products that recognize the medical complexities of many NICU babies, and they try to make it joyful and fun, what a great resource. So don't worry, I'm going to link to that in the show notes. But I just was so filled with a lot of hope and encouragement. And I think maybe lit a little bit of a fire to think, how can I take our experience in the NICU and help make this community just a little bit better? I hope it leaves you with that question as well. And with that, I will see y'all next time. Thanks y'all for listening to NICU Babies Parent Support. Every parent and every experience is welcome here. If you are a NICU parent and you're finding yourself in need of support, please download our app. You can find it in the Apple Store or on Google Play, Hand to Hold. And if you love today's episode, you can share it, you can subscribe, and you can most certainly review it. We would love, love, love your reviews. It's how we reach more NICU parents. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.